This is the very road by which I came into Christminster years ago, full of plans." "Well, whatever the road is, I think my time is nearly up, as I have to be in the bar by 11 o'clock, and as I said, I shan't ask for the day to go with you to see your aunt, so perhaps we had better part here. I'd sooner not walk up Chief Street with you, since you've come to no conclusion at all." "Very well. But you said when we were getting up this morning that you had something you wished to tell me before I left." "So I had. 2 things. One in particular. But you wouldn't promise to keep it a secret. I'll tell you now if you promise. As an honest woman I wish you to know it. It was what I began telling you in the night, about that gentleman who managed the Sydney Hotel." Arabella spoke somewhat hurriedly for her. "You'll keep it close?" "Yes, yes, I promise," said Jude impatiently. "Of course I don't want to reveal your secrets. Whenever I met him out for a walk he used to say that he was much taken with my looks, and he kept pressing me to marry him. I never thought of coming back to England again, and being out there in Australia with no home of my own after leaving my father, I at last agreed and did." "What? Marry him?" "Yes." "Regularly? Legally? In church?" "Yes, and lived with him till shortly before I left. It was stupid, I know, but I did. There, now I've told you. Don't round upon me. He talks of coming back to England, poor old chap. But if he does, he won't be likely to find me." Jude stood pale and fixed. "Why the devil didn't you tell me last night?" he said. "Well, I didn't. Won't you make it up with me, then?" "So in talking of your husband to the bar gentleman, you meant him, of course, not me?" "Of course. Come, don't fuss about it." "I have nothing more to say," replied Jude. "I have nothing at all to say about the crime you've confessed to." "Crime? Pooh! They don't think much of such as that over there. Lots of 'em do it." "Well, if you take it like that, I shall go back to him. He was very fond of me, and we lived honourable enough, and as respectable as any married couple in the colony. How did I know where you were?" "I won't go blaming you. I could say a good deal, but perhaps it would be misplaced. What do you wish me to do?" "Nothing. There was one thing more I wanted to tell you, but I fancy we've seen enough of one another for the present. I shall think over what you said about your circumstances and let you know." Thus they parted. Jude watched her disappear in the direction of the hotel, and entered the railway station close by. Finding that it wanted 3/4 of an hour of the time at which he could get a train back to Alfredston, he strolled mechanically into the city as far as to the Fourways, where he stood as he had so often stood before, and surveyed Chief Street, stretching ahead, with its college after college, in picturesqueness unrivalled except by such continental vistas as the Street of Palaces in Genoa, the lines of the buildings being as distinct in the morning air as in an architectural drawing. But Jude was far from seeing or criticizing these things. They were hidden by an indescribable consciousness of Arabella's midnight contiguity, a sense of degradation at his revived experiences with her, of her appearance as she lay asleep at dawn, which set upon his motionless face a look as of one accursed. If he could only have felt resentment towards her, he would have been less unhappy, but he pitied while he contemned her. Jude turned and retraced his steps. Drawing again towards the station, he started at hearing his name pronounced, less at the name than at the voice. To his great surprise, no other than Sue stood like a vision before him, her look bodeful and anxious as in a dream, her little mouth nervous, and her strained eyes speaking reproachful inquiry. "Oh, Jude, I am so glad to meet you like this," she said in quick, uneven accents not far from a sob. Then she flushed as she observed his thought that they had not met since her marriage. They looked away from each other to hide their emotion, took each other's hand without further speech, and went on together a while, till she glanced at him with furtive solicitude. "I arrived at Alfredston station last night, as you asked me to, and there was nobody to meet me. But I reached Mary Green alone, and they told me Aunt was a trifle better. I sat up with her, and as you did not come all night, I was frightened about you. I thought that perhaps, when you found yourself back in the old city, you were upset at thinking I was married, and not there as I used to be, and that you had nobody to speak to, so you had tried to drown your gloom, as you did at that former time when you were disappointed about entering as a student, and had forgotten your promise to me that you never would again, and this, I thought, was why you hadn't come to meet me. And you came to hunt me up and deliver me like a good angel. I thought I would come by the morning train and try to find you in case... I did think of my promise to you, dear, continually. I shall never break out again as I did, I am sure. I may have been doing nothing better, but I was not doing that. I loathe the thought of it. I am glad your staying had nothing to do with that. But, she said, the faintest pout entering into her tone, you didn't come back last night and meet me as you engaged to? I didn't. I am sorry to say. I had an appointment at 9 o'clock, too late for me to catch the train that would have met yours, or to get home at all. Looking at his loved one, as she appeared to him now, in his tender thought, the sweetest and most disinterested comrade that he had ever had, living largely in vivid imaginings, so ethereal a creature that her spirit could be seen trembling through her limbs, he felt heartily ashamed of his earthliness in spending the hours he had spent in Arabella's company. There was something rude and immoral in thrusting these recent facts of his life upon the mind of one who, to him, was so uncarnate as to seem at times impossible as a human wife to any average man. And yet she was Philipson's. How she had become such, how she lived as such, passed his comprehension as he regarded her today. "You'll go back with me," he said. "There's a train just now. I wonder how my aunt is by this time. And so, Sue, you really came on my account all this way. At what an early time you must have started, poor thing." "Yes. Sitting up watching alone made me all nerves for you, and instead of going to bed when it got light, I started. And now you won't frighten me like this again about your morals for nothing." He was not so sure that she had been frightened about his morals for nothing. He released her hand till they had entered the train. It seemed the same carriage he had lately got out of with another, where they sat down side by side, Sue between him and the window. He regarded the delicate lines of her profile, and the small, tight, apple-like convexities of her bodice, so different from Arabella's amplitudes. Though she knew he was looking at her, she did not turn to him, but kept her eyes forward, as if afraid that by meeting his own some troublous discussion would be initiated. "Sue, you are married now, you know, like me, and yet we have been in such a hurry that we have not said a word about it." "There's no necessity," she quickly returned. "Oh, well, perhaps not, but I wish—" "Jude, don't talk about me. I wish you wouldn't," she entreated. "It distresses me, rather. Forgive my saying it. Where did you stay last night?" She had asked the question in perfect innocence to change the topic. He knew that, and said merely, "At an inn," although it would have been a relief to tell her of his meeting with an unexpected one. But the latter's final announcement of her marriage in Australia bewildered him, lest what he might say should do his ignorant wife an injury. Their talk proceeded but awkwardly till they reached Alfredston. That Sue was not as she had been, but was labelled Philipson, paralyzed Jude whenever he wanted to commune with her as an individual. Yet she seemed unaltered. He could not say why. There remained the 5-mile extra journey into the country, which it was just as easy to walk as to drive, the greater part of it being uphill. Jude had never before in his life gone that road with Sue, though he had with another. It was now as if he carried a bright light which temporarily banished the shady associations of the earlier time. Sue talked, but Jude noticed that she still kept the conversation from herself. At length he inquired if her husband were well. "Oh, yes," she said. "He is obliged to be in the school all the day, or he would have come with me. He is so good and kind that to accompany me he would have dismissed the school for once, even against his principles, for he is strongly opposed to giving casual holidays, only I wouldn't let him. I felt it would be better to come alone. Aunt Drusilla, I knew, was very eccentric, and his being almost a stranger to her now would have made it irksome to both. Since it turns out that she is hardly conscious, I am glad I did not ask him." Jude had walked moodily while this praise of Phillotson was being expressed. "Mr. Phillotson obliges you in everything, as he ought," he said. "Of course." "You ought to be a happy wife." "And of course I am." "Bride, I might almost have said, as yet. It is not so many weeks since I gave you to him, and—" "Yes, I know, I know." There was something in her face which belied her late assuring words, so strictly proper and so lifelessly spoken that they might have been taken from a list of model speeches in The Wife's Guide to Conduct. Jude knew the quality of every vibration in Sue's voice, could read every symptom of her mental condition, and he was convinced that she was unhappy, although she had not been a month married. But her rushing away thus from home to see the last of a relative whom she had hardly known in her life proved nothing, for Sue naturally did such things as those. "Well, you have my good wishes now, as always, Mrs. Phillotson." She reproached him by a glance. "No, you are not Mrs. Phillotson," murmured Jude. "You are dear, free Sue Bridehead, only you don't know it. Wifedom has not yet squashed up and digested you in its vast maw as an atom which has no further individuality." Sue put on a look of being offended, till she answered, "Nor has husbanddom you, so far as I can see." "But it has," he said, shaking his head sadly. When they reached the lone cottage under the firs, between the Brown House and Mary Green, in which Jude and Arabella had lived and quarrelled, he turned to look at it. A squalid family lived there now. He could not help saying to Sue, "That's the house my wife and I occupied the whole of the time we lived together. I brought her home to that house." She looked at it. "That to you was what the schoolhouse at Shaston is to me." "Yes, but I was not very happy there, as you are in yours." She closed her lips in retortive silence, and they walked some way till she glanced at him to see how he was taking it. "Of course, I may have exaggerated your happiness. One never knows," he continued blandly. "Don't think that, Jude, for a moment, even though you may have said it to sting me. He's as good to me as a man can be, and gives me perfect liberty, which elderly husbands don't do in general. If you think I am not happy because he's too old for me, you are wrong. I don't think anything against him, to you, dear." "And you won't say things to distress me, will you?" "I will not." He said no more, but he knew that, from some cause or other, in taking Phillotson as a husband, Sue felt that she had done what she ought not to have done. They plunged into the concave field on the other side of which rose the village, the field wherein Jude had received a thrashing from the farmer many years earlier. On ascending to the village and approaching the house, they found Mrs. Edlin standing at the door, who at sight of them lifted her hands deprecatingly. "She's downstairs, if you'll believe me," cried the widow. "Out of bed she got, and nothing could turn her. What will come o't I do not know." On entering, there indeed by the fireplace sat the old woman, wrapped in blankets, and turning upon them a countenance like that of Sebastiano's Lazarus. They must have looked their amazement, for she said in a hollow voice, "Ah, skeered ye, have I? I wasn't going to bide up there no longer to please nobody. 'Tis more than flesh and blood can bear to be ordered to do this and that by a fellow that don't know half as well as you do yourself. Ah, you'll rue this marrying as well as he," she added, turning to Sue. "All our family do, and nearly all everybody else's. You should have done as I did, you simpleton. And Phillotson, the schoolmaster, of all men, what made he marry him?" "What makes most women marry, aunt." "Ah, you mean to say you loved the man?" "I don't mean to say anything definite." "Do you love un?" "Don't ask me, aunt." "I can mind the man very well. A very civil, honourable liver. But, Lord, I don't want to wound your feelings, but there be certain men here and there that no woman of any niceness can stomach. I should have said he was one. I don't say so now, since you must ha' known better than I, but that's what I should have said." Sue jumped up and went out. Jude followed her and found her in the outhouse, crying. "Don't cry, dear," said Jude in distress. "She means well, but he's very crusty and queer now, you know." "Oh, no, it isn't that," said Sue, trying to dry her eyes. "I don't mind her roughness one bit." "What is it, then?" "It is that what she says is true." "God! What? You don't like him?" asked Jude. "I don't mean that," she said hastily. "That perhaps I ought not to have married." He wondered if she really had been going to say that at first. They went back, and the subject was smoothed over, and her aunt took rather kindly to Sue, telling her that not many young women newly married would have come so far to see a sick old crone like her. In the afternoon Sue prepared to depart, Jude hiring a neighbour to drive her to Alfredston. "I'll go with you to the station if you'd like," he said. She would not let him. The man came round with the trap, and Jude helped her into it, perhaps with unnecessary attention, for she looked at him prohibitively. "I suppose I may come to see you some day, when I am back again at Melchester," he half crossly observed. She bent down and said softly, "No, dear, you are not to come yet. I don't think you are in a good mood." "Very well," said Jude. "Good-bye." "Good-bye." She waved her hand and was gone. "She's right. I won't go," he murmured. He passed the evening and following days in mortifying, by every possible means, his wish to see her, nearly starving himself in attempts to extinguish by fasting his passionate tendency to love her. He read sermons on discipline, and hunted up passages in church history that treated of the ascetics of the 2nd century. Before he had returned from Mary Green to Melchester, there arrived a letter from Arabella. The sight of it revived a stronger feeling of self-condemnation for his brief return to her society than for his attachment to Sue. The letter, he perceived, bore a London postmark instead of the Christminster one. Arabella informed him that a few days after their parting in the morning at Christminster, she had been surprised by an affectionate letter from her Australian husband, formerly manager of the hotel in Sydney. He had come to England on purpose to find her, and had taken a free, fully licensed public in Lambeth, where he wished her to join him in conducting the business, which was likely to be a very thriving one, the house being situated in an excellent, densely populated, gin-drinking neighbourhood, and already doing a trade of £200 a month, which could be easily doubled. As he had said that he loved her very much still, and implored her to tell him where she was, and as they had only parted in a slight tiff, and as her engagement in Christminster was only temporary, she had just gone to join him as he urged. She could not help feeling that she belonged to him more than to Jude, since she had properly married him and had lived with him much longer than with her first husband. In thus wishing Jude good-bye, she bore him no ill will, and trusted he would not turn upon her, a weak woman, and inform against her, and bring her to ruin, now that she had a chance of improving her circumstances and leading a genteel life. 10. Jude returned to Melchester, which had the questionable recommendation of being only 12.5 miles from his Sue's now permanent residence. At first he felt that this nearness was a distinct reason for not going southward at all, but Christminster was too sad a place to bear, while the proximity of Shaston to Melchester might afford him the glory of worsting the enemy in a close engagement, such as was deliberately sought by the priests and virgins of the early church, who, disdaining an ignominious flight from temptation, became even chamber partners with impunity. Jude did not pause to remember that, in the laconic words of the historian, insulted nature sometimes vindicated her rights in such circumstances. He now returned with feverish desperation to his study for the priesthood, in the recognition that the single-mindedness of his aims and his fidelity to the cause had been more than questionable of late. His passion for Sue troubled his soul, yet his lawful abandonment to the society of Arabella for 12 hours seemed instinctively a worse thing, even though she had not told him of her Sydney husband till afterwards. He had, he verily believed, overcome all tendency to fly to liquor, which indeed he had never done from taste, but merely as an escape from intolerable misery of mind. Yet he perceived with despondency that, taken all round, he was a man of too many passions to make a good clergyman. The utmost he could hope for was that in a life of constant internal warfare between flesh and spirit, the former might not always be victorious. As a hobby, auxiliary to his readings in divinity, he developed his slight skill in church music and thorough bass till he could join in part singing from notation with some accuracy. A mile or two from Melchester there was a restored village church to which Jude had originally gone to fix the new columns and capitals. By this means he had become acquainted with the organist, and the ultimate result was that he joined the choir as a bass voice. He walked out to this parish twice every Sunday, and sometimes in the week. One evening about Easter the choir met for practice, and a new hymn which Jude had heard of as being by a Wessex composer was to be tried and prepared for the following week. It turned out to be a strangely emotional composition. As they all sang it over and over again, its harmonies grew upon Jude and moved him exceedingly. When they had finished, he went round to the organist to make inquiries. The score was in manuscript, the name of the composer being at the head, together with the title of the hymn, The Foot of the Cross. "Yes," said the organist, "he is a local man. He is a professional musician at Kennetbridge, between here and Christminster. The vicar knows him. He was brought up and educated in Christminster traditions, which accounts for the quality of the piece. I think he plays in the large church there, and has a surpliced choir. He comes to Melchester sometimes, and once tried to get the cathedral organ when the post was vacant. The hymn is getting about everywhere this Easter." As he walked, humming the air on his way home, Jude fell to musing on its composer and the reasons why he composed it. What a man of sympathies he must be! Perplexed and harassed as he himself was about Sue and Arabella, and troubled as was his conscience by the complication of his position, how he would like to know that man. "He of all men would understand my difficulties," said the impulsive Jude. "If there were any person in the world to choose as a confidant, this composer would be the one, for he must have suffered and throbbed and yearned." In brief, ill as he could afford the time and money for the journey, fully resolved, like the child that he was, to go to Kennetbridge the very next Sunday, he duly started early in the morning, for it was only by a series of crooked railways that he could get to the town. About midday he reached it, and crossing the bridge into the quaint old borough, he inquired for the house of the composer. They told him it was a red brick building some little way further on, also that the gentleman himself had just passed along the street not 5 minutes before. "Which way?" asked Jude, with alacrity. "Straight along homeward from church." Jude hastened on, and soon had the pleasure of observing a man in a black coat and a black slouched felt hat no considerable distance ahead. Stretching out his legs yet more widely, he stalked after. "A hungry soul in pursuit of a full soul," he said. "I must speak to that man." He could not, however, overtake the musician before he had entered his own house, and then arose the question if this were an expedient time to call. Whether or not, he decided to do so there and then, now that he had got here, the distance home being too great for him to wait till late in the afternoon. This man of soul would understand scant ceremony, and might be quite a perfect adviser in a case in which an earthly and illegitimate passion had cunningly obtained entrance into his heart through the opening afforded for religion. Jude accordingly rang the bell, and was admitted. The musician came to him in a moment, and being respectably dressed, good-looking, and frank in manner, Jude obtained a favourable reception. He was nevertheless conscious that there would be a certain awkwardness in explaining his errand. "I have been singing in the choir of a little church near Melchester," he said, "and we have this week practised the Foot of the Cross, which I understand, sir, that you composed." "I did, a year or so ago." "I like it. I think it supremely beautiful." "Ah, well, other people have said so too. Yes, there's money in it, if I could only see about getting it published. I have other compositions to go with it too. I wish I could bring them out, for I haven't made a £5 note out of any of them yet. These publishing people, they want the copyright of an obscure composer's work, such as mine is, for almost less than I should have to pay a person for making a fair manuscript copy of the score. The one you speak of I have lent to various friends about here in Melchester, and so it has got to be sung a little. But music is a poor staff to lean on. I am giving it up entirely. You must go into trade if you want to make money nowadays. The wine business is what I am thinking of. This is my forthcoming list. It is not issued yet, but you can take one." He handed Jude an advertisement list of several pages in booklet shape, ornamentally margined with a red line, in which were set forth the various clarets, champagnes, ports, sherries, and other wines with which he purposed to initiate his new venture. It took Jude more than by surprise that the man with the soul was thus and thus, and he felt that he could not open up his confidences. They talked a little longer, but constrainedly, for when the musician found that Jude was a poor man, his manner changed from what it had been while Jude's appearance and address deceived him as to his position and pursuits. Jude stammered out something about his feelings in wishing to congratulate the author on such an exalted composition, and took an embarrassed leave. All the way home, by the slow Sunday train, sitting in the fireless waiting-rooms on this cold spring day, he was depressed enough at his simplicity in taking such a journey. But no sooner did he reach his Melchester lodging than he found awaiting him a letter which had arrived that morning a few minutes after he had left the house. It was a contrite little note from Sue, in which she said, with sweet humility, that she felt she had been horrid in telling him he was not to come to see her, that she had despised herself for having been so conventional, and that he was to be sure to come by the 11:45 train that very Sunday and have dinner with them at 1:30. Jude almost tore his hair at having missed this letter till it was too late to act upon its contents, but he had chastened himself considerably of late, and at last his chimerical expedition to Kennetbridge really did seem to have been another special intervention of Providence to keep him away from temptation. But a growing impatience of faith, which he had noticed in himself more than once of late, made him pass over in ridicule the idea that God sent people on fools' errands. He longed to see her. He was angry at having missed her, and he wrote instantly, telling her what had happened, and saying he had not enough patience to wait till the following Sunday, but would come any day in the week that she liked to name. Since he wrote a little over-ardently, Sue, as her manner was, delayed her reply till Thursday before Good Friday, when she said he might come that afternoon if he wished, this being the earliest day on which she could welcome him, for she was now assistant teacher in her husband's school. Jude therefore got leave from the cathedral works at the trifling expense of a stoppage of pay, and went. Part Fourth. At Shaston. Whoso prefers either matrimony or other ordinance before the good of man and the plain exigence of charity, let him profess Papist or Protestant or what he will, he is no better than a Pharisee. John Milton. 1. Shaston, the ancient British Palador, from whose foundation first such strange reports arise, as Drayton sang it, was and is in itself the city of a dream. Vague imaginings of its castle, its 3 mints, its magnificent apsidal abbey, the chief glory of South Wessex, its 12 churches, its shrines, chantries, hospitals, its gabled freestone mansions, all now ruthlessly swept away, throw the visitor, even against his will, into a pensive melancholy which the stimulating atmosphere and limitless landscape around him can scarcely dispel. The spot was the burial place of a king and a queen, of abbots and abbesses, saints and bishops, knights and squires. The bones of King Edward, the martyr, carefully removed hither for holy preservation, brought Shaston a renown which made it the resort of pilgrims from every part of Europe, and enabled it to maintain a reputation extending far beyond English shores. To this fair creation of the great Middle Age, the dissolution was, as historians tell us, the death-knell. With the destruction of the enormous abbey, the whole place collapsed in a general ruin. The martyrs' bones met with the fate of the sacred pile that held them, and not a stone is now left to tell where they lie. The natural picturesqueness and singularity of the town still remain, but strange to say, these qualities, which were noted by many writers in ages when scenic beauty is said to have been unappreciated, are passed over in this, and one of the queerest, quaintest spots in England stands virtually unvisited today. It has a unique position on the summit of a steep and imposing scarp, rising on the north, south, and west sides of the borough, out of the deep alluvial vale of Blackmoor. The view from the castle green over 3 counties of verdant pasture, South, Mid, and Nether Wessex, being as sudden a surprise to the unexpectant traveller's eyes as the medicinal air is to his lungs. Impossible to a railway, it can best be reached on foot, next best by light vehicles, and it is hardly accessible to these but by a sort of isthmus on the north-east that connects it with the high chalk tableland on that side. Such is, and such was, the now world-forgotten Shaston or Palador. Its situation rendered water the great want of the town, and within living memory horses, donkeys, and men may have been seen toiling up the winding ways to the top of the height, laden with tubs and barrels filled from the wells beneath the mountain, and hawkers retailing their contents at the price of a halfpenny a bucketful. This difficulty in the water supply, together with two other odd facts, namely that the chief graveyard slopes up as steeply as a roof behind the church, and that in former times the town passed through a curious period of corruption, conventual and domestic, gave rise to the saying that Shaston was remarkable for three consolations to man, such as the world afforded not elsewhere. It was a place where the churchyard lay nearer heaven than the church steeple, where beer was more plentiful than water, and where there were more wanton women than honest wives and maids. It is also said that after the Middle Ages the inhabitants were too poor to pay their priests, and hence were compelled to pull down their churches and refrain altogether from the public worship of God, a necessity which they bemoaned over their cups in the settles of their inns on Sunday afternoons. In those days the Shastonians were apparently not without a sense of humour. There was another peculiarity, this a modern one, which Shaston appeared to owe to its site. It was the resting-place and headquarters of the proprietors of wandering vans, shows, shooting galleries, and other itinerant concerns, whose business lay largely at fairs and markets. As strange wild birds are seen assembled on some lofty promontory, meditatively pausing for longer flights, or to return by the course they followed thither, so here, in this cliff town, stood in stultified silence the yellow and green caravans bearing names not local, as if surprised by a change in the landscape so violent as to hinder their further progress, and here they usually remained all the winter till they turned to seek again their old tracks in the following spring. It was to this breezy and whimsical spot that Jude ascended from the nearest station for the first time in his life about 4 o'clock one afternoon, and entering on the summit of the peak after a toilsome climb, passed the first houses of the aerial town, and drew towards the schoolhouse. The hour was too early. The pupils were still in school, humming small like a swarm of gnats, and he withdrew a few steps along Abbey Walk, whence he regarded the spot which fate had made the home of all he loved best in the world. In front of the schools, which were extensive and stone-built, grew two enormous beeches with smooth mouse-coloured trunks, as such trees will only grow on chalk uplands. Within the mullioned and transomed windows he could see the black, brown, and flaxen crowns of the scholars over the sills, and to pass the time away he walked down to the level terrace where the Abbey gardens once had spread, his heart throbbing in spite of him. Unwilling to enter till the children were dismissed, he remained here till young voices could be heard in the open air, and girls in white pinafores over red and blue frocks appeared dancing along the paths which the abbess, prioress, sub-prioress, and 50 nuns had demurely paced 3 centuries earlier. Retracing his steps, he found he had waited too long, and that Sue had gone out into the town at the heels of the last scholar, Mr. Phillotson having been absent all the afternoon at a teachers' meeting at Shottsford. Jude went into the empty schoolroom and sat down, the girl who was sweeping the floor having informed him that Mrs. Phillotson would be back again in a few minutes. A piano stood near, actually the old piano that Phillotson had possessed at Mary Green, and though the dark afternoon almost prevented him seeing the notes, Jude touched them in his humble way, and could not help modulating into the hymn which had so affected him in the previous week. A figure moved behind him, and thinking it was still the girl with the broom, Jude took no notice, till the person came close and laid her fingers lightly upon his base hand. The imposed hand was a little one he seemed to know, and he turned. "Don't stop," said Sue. "I like it. I learnt it before I left Melchester. They used to play it in the training school." "I can't strum before you. Play it for me." "Oh, well, I don't mind." Sue sat down, and her rendering of the piece, though not remarkable, seemed divine as compared with his own. She, like him, was evidently touched, to her own surprise, by the recalled air, and when she had finished and he moved his hand towards hers, it met his own half-way. Jude grasped it, just as he had done before her marriage. "It is odd," she said, in a voice quite changed, "that I should care about that air, because—" "Because what?" "I am not that sort, quite." "Not easily moved?" "I didn't quite mean that." "Oh, but you are one of that sort, for you are just like me at heart." "But not at head." She played on, and suddenly turned round, and by an unpremeditated instinct each clasped the other's hand again. She uttered a forced little laugh as she relinquished his quickly. "How funny," she said. "I wonder what we both did that for." "I suppose because we are both alike, as I said before." "Not in our thoughts, perhaps a little in our feelings." "And they rule thoughts. Isn't it enough to make one blaspheme that the composer of that hymn is one of the most commonplace men I ever met?" "Not in our thoughts, perhaps a little in our feelings." "And they rule thoughts. Isn't it enough to make one blaspheme that the composer of that hymn is one of the most commonplace men I ever met?" "What, you know him?" "I went to see him." "Oh, you goose! To do just what I should have done. Why did you?" "Because we are not alike," he said dryly. "Now we'll have some tea," said Sue. "Shall we have it here instead of in my house? It is no trouble to get the kettle and things brought in. We don't live at the school, you know, but in that ancient dwelling across the way called Old Grove Place. It is so antique and dismal that it depresses me dreadfully. Such houses are very well to visit, but not to live in. I feel crushed into the earth by the weight of so many previous lives there spent. In a new place like these schools there is only your own life to support. Sit down, and I'll tell Ada to bring the tea things across." He waited in the light of the stove, the door of which she flung open before going out, and when she returned, followed by the maiden with tea, they sat down by the same light, assisted by the blue rays of a spirit lamp under the brass kettle on the stand. "This is one of your wedding presents to me," she said, signifying the latter. "Yes," said Jude. The kettle of his gift sang with some satire in its note to his mind, and to change the subject he said, "Do you know of any good readable edition of the uncanonical books of the New Testament? You don't read them in the school, I suppose?" "Oh dear, no. 'Twould alarm the neighbourhood. Yes, there is one. I am not familiar with it now, though I was interested in it when my former friend was alive. Cowper's Apocryphal Gospels." "That sounds like what I want." His thoughts, however, reverted with a twinge to the former friend, by whom she meant, as he knew, the university comrade of her earlier days. He wondered if she talked of him to Phillotson. "The Gospel of Nicodemus is very nice," she went on, to keep him from his jealous thoughts, which she read clearly, as she always did. Indeed, when they talked on an indifferent subject, as now, there was ever a second silent conversation passing between their emotions, so perfect was the reciprocity between them. "It is quite like the genuine article, all cut up into verses too, so that it is like one of the other evangelists read in a dream, when things are the same yet not the same. But, Jude, do you take an interest in those questions still? Are you getting up Apologetica?" "Yes, I'm reading divinity harder than ever." She regarded him curiously. "Why do you look at me like that?" said Jude. "Oh, why do you want to know?" I am sure you can tell me anything I may be ignorant of in that subject. You must have learnt a lot of everything from your dear dead friend." "We won't get on to that now," she coaxed. "Will you be carving out at the church again next week, where you learnt the pretty hymn?" "Yes, perhaps." "That will be very nice. Shall I come and see you there? It is in this direction, and I could come any afternoon by train for half an hour." "No, don't come." "What? Aren't we going to be friends, then, any longer as we used to be?" "No." "I didn't know that. I thought you were always going to be kind to me." "No, I am not." "What have I done, then? I am sure I thought we two—" The tremolo in her voice caused her to break off. "Sue, I sometimes think you are a flirt," he said abruptly. There was a momentary pause, till she suddenly jumped up, and to his surprise he saw by the kettle flame that her face was flushed. "I can't talk to you any longer, Jude," she said, the tragic contralto note having come back as of old. "It is getting too dark to stay together like this, after playing morbid Good Friday tunes that make one feel that one shouldn't. We mustn't sit and talk in this way any more. Yes, you must go away, for you mistake me. I am very much the reverse of what you say so cruelly. Oh, Jude, it was cruel to say that. Yet I can't tell you the truth. I should shock you by letting you know how I give way to my impulses, and how much I feel that I shouldn't have been provided with attractiveness unless it were meant to be exercised. Some women's love of being loved is insatiable, and so, often, is their love of loving, and in the last case they may find that they can't give it continuously to the chamber officer appointed by the bishop's license to receive it. But you are so straightforward, Jude, that you can't understand me. Now you must go. I am sorry my husband is not at home." "Are you?" "I perceive I have said that in mere convention. Honestly, I don't think that I am sorry. It does not matter either way, sad to say." As they had overdone the grasp of hands some time sooner, she touched his fingers but lightly when he went out now. He had hardly gone from the door when, with a dissatisfied look, she jumped up on a form and opened the iron casement of a window beneath which he was passing in the path without. "When do you leave here to catch your train, Jude?" she asked. He looked up in some surprise. "The coach that runs to meet it goes in 3/4 of an hour or so." "What will you do with yourself for that time?" "Oh, wander about, I suppose. Perhaps I shall go and sit in the old church." "It does seem hard of me to pack you off so. You have thought enough of churches, heaven knows, without going into one in the dark. Stay there." "Where?" "Where you are. I can talk to you better like this than when you were inside. It was so kind and tender of you to give up half a day's work to come and see me. You are Joseph, the dreamer of dreams, dear Jude, and a tragic Don Quixote. And sometimes you are St. Stephen, who, while they were stoning him, could see heaven opened. Oh, my poor friend and comrade, you'll suffer yet." Now that the high window-sill was between them, so that he could not get at her, she seemed not to mind indulging in a frankness she had feared at close quarters. "I have been thinking," she continued, still in the tone of one brimful of feeling, "that the social moulds civilization fits us into have no more relation to our actual shapes than the conventional shapes of the constellations have to the real star patterns. I am called Mrs. Richard Phillotson, living a calm wedded life with my counterpart of that name. But I am not really Mrs. Richard Phillotson, but a woman tossed about, all alone, with aberrant passions and unaccountable antipathies. Now you mustn't wait longer, or you will lose the coach. Come and see me again. You must come to the house, then." "Yes," said Jude. "When shall it be?" "Tomorrow week. Good-bye, good-bye." She stretched out her hand and stroked his forehead pitifully, just once. Jude said good-bye and went away into the darkness. Passing along Bimport Street, he thought he heard the wheels of the coach departing, and truly enough, when he reached the Duke's Arms in the market-place, the coach had gone. It was impossible for him to get to the station on foot in time for this train, and he settled himself perforce to wait for the next, the last to Melchester that night. He wandered about a while, obtained something to eat, and then, having another half-hour on his hands, his feet involuntarily took him through the venerable graveyard of Trinity Church, with its avenues of limes, in the direction of the schools again. They were entirely in darkness. She had said she lived over the way at Old Grove Place, a house which he soon discovered from her description of its antiquity. A glimmering candle-light shone from a front window, the shutters being yet unclosed. He could see the interior clearly, the floor sinking a couple of steps below the road without, which had become raised during the centuries since the house was built. Sue, evidently just come in, was standing with her hat on in this front parlour or sitting-room, whose walls were lined with wainscoting of panelled oak reaching from floor to ceiling, the latter being crossed by huge moulded beams only a little way above her head. The mantelpiece was of the same heavy description, carved with Jacobean pilasters and scroll-work. The centuries did, indeed, ponderously overhang a young wife who passed her time here. She had opened a rosewood work-box, and was looking at a photograph. Having contemplated it a little while, she pressed it against her bosom, and put it again in its place. Then, becoming aware that she had not obscured the windows, she came forward to do so, candle in hand. It was too dark for her to see Jude without, but he could see her face distinctly, and there was an unmistakable tearfulness about the dark, long-lashed eyes. She closed the shutters, and Jude turned away to pursue his solitary journey home. "Whose photograph was she looking at?" he said. He had once given her his, but she had others, he knew. Yet it was his, surely. He knew he should go to see her again according to her invitation. Those earnest men he read of, the saints, whom Sue, with gentle irreverence, called his demigods, would have shunned such encounters if they had doubted their own strength, but he could not. He might fast and pray during the whole interval, but the human was more powerful in him than the divine. 2. However, if God disposed not, woman did. The next morning but one brought him this note from her. "Don't come next week. On your own account don't. We were too free, under the influence of that morbid hymn in the twilight. Think no more than you can help of Susanna Florence Mary." The disappointment was keen. He knew her mood, the look of her face, when she subscribed herself at length thus, but whatever her mood, he could not say she was wrong in her view. He replied, "I acquiesce. You are right. It is a lesson in renunciation which I suppose I ought to learn at this season. Jude." He dispatched the note on Easter Eve, and there seemed a finality in their decisions. But other forces and laws than theirs were in operation. On Easter Monday morning he received a message from the widow Edlin, whom he had directed to telegraph if anything serious happened. "Your aunt is sinking. Come at once." He threw down his tools and went. 3.5 hours later he was crossing the downs about Mary Green, and presently plunged into the concave field across which the short cut was made to the village. As he ascended on the other side, a labouring man, who had been watching his approach from a gate across the path, moved uneasily and prepared to speak. "I can see in his face that she is dead," said Jude. "Poor Aunt Drusilla." It was as he had supposed, and Mrs. Edlin had sent out the man to break the news to him. "She wouldn't have knowed 'ee. She lay like a doll with glass eyes, so it didn't matter that you wasn't here," said he. Jude went on to the house, and in the afternoon, when everything was done and the layers out had finished their beer and gone, he sat down alone in the silent place. It was absolutely necessary to communicate with Sue, though 2 or 3 days earlier they had agreed to mutual severance. He wrote in the briefest terms, "Aunt Drusilla is dead, having been taken almost suddenly. The funeral is on Friday afternoon." He remained in and about Mary Green through the intervening days, went out on Friday morning to see that the grave was finished, and wondered if Sue would come. She had not written, and that seemed to signify rather that she would come than that she would not. Having timed her by her only possible train, he locked the door about midday, and crossed the hollow field to the verge of the upland by the brown house, where he stood and looked over the vast prospect northwards, and over the nearer landscape in which Alfredston stood. 2 miles behind it, a jet of white steam was travelling from the left to the right of the picture. There was a long time to wait, even now, till he would know if she had arrived. He did wait, however, and at last a small hired vehicle pulled up at the bottom of the hill, and a person alighted, the conveyance going back, while the passenger began ascending the hill. He knew her, and she looked so slender today that it seemed as if she might be crushed in the intensity of a too passionate embrace, such as it was not for him to give. 2/3 of the way up, her head suddenly took a solicitous poise, and he knew that she had at that moment recognized him. Her face soon began a pensive smile, which lasted till, having descended a little way, he met her. "I thought," she began, with nervous quickness, "that it would be so sad to let you attend the funeral alone, and so, at the last moment, I came." "Dear, faithful Sue," murmured Jude. With the elusiveness of her curious double nature, however, Sue did not stand still for any further greeting, though it wanted some time to the burial. A pathos so unusually compounded as that which attended to this hour was unlikely to repeat itself for years, if ever, and Jude would have paused and meditated and conversed. But Sue either saw it not at all, or, seeing it more than he, would not allow herself to feel it. The sad and simple ceremony was soon over, their progress to the church being almost at a trot, the bustling undertaker having a more important funeral an hour later, 3 miles off. Drusilla was put into the new ground, quite away from her ancestors. Sue and Jude had gone side by side to the grave, and now sat down to tea in the familiar house, their lives united at least in this last attention to the dead. "She was opposed to marriage from first to last, you say?" murmured Sue. "Yes, particularly for members of our family." Her eyes met his, and remained on him a while. "We are rather a sad family, don't you think, Jude?" She said we made bad husbands and wives. Certainly we make unhappy ones. At all events, I do, for one. Sue was silent. "Is it wrong, Jude," she said, with a tentative tremor, "for a husband or wife to tell a third person that they are unhappy in their marriage? If a marriage ceremony is a religious thing, it is possibly wrong. But if it is only a sordid contract, based on material convenience in householding, rating, and taxing, and the inheritance of land and money by children, making it necessary that the male parent should be known, which it seems to be, why surely a person may say, even proclaim upon the housetops, that it hurts and grieves him or her. I have said so, anyhow, to you." Presently she went on, "Are there many couples, do you think, where one dislikes the other for no definite fault?" "Yes, I suppose. If either cares for another person, for instance. But even apart from that, wouldn't the woman, for example, be very bad-natured if she didn't like to live with her husband? Merely?" Her voice undulated, and he guessed things. Merely because she had a personal feeling against it, a physical objection, a fastidiousness, or whatever it may be called, although she might respect and be grateful to him. I am merely putting a case. Ought she try to overcome her pruderies? Jude threw a troubled look at her. He said, looking away, "It would be just one of those cases in which my experiences go contrary to my dogmas. Speaking as an order-loving man, which I hope I am, though I fear I am not, I should say yes. Speaking from experience and unbiased nature, I should say no. Sue, I believe you are not happy." "Of course I am," she contradicted. "How can a woman be unhappy who has only been married 8 weeks to a man she chose freely?" "Chose freely?" "Why do you repeat it? But I have to go back by the 6 o'clock train. You will be staying on here, I suppose?" "For a few days, to wind up Aunt's affairs. This house is gone now. Shall I go to the train with you?" A little laugh of objection came from Sue. "I think not. You may come part of the way." "But stop. You can't go tonight. That train won't take you to Shaston. You must stay and go back tomorrow. Mrs. Edlin has plenty of room if you don't like to stay here." "Very well," she said dubiously. "I didn't tell him I would come for certain." Jude went to the widow's house adjoining to let her know, and returning in a few minutes, sat down again. "It is horrible how we are circumstanced, Sue, horrible," he said abruptly, with his eyes bent to the floor. "No. Why?" "I can't tell you all my part of the gloom. Your part is that you ought not to have married him. I saw it before you had done it, but I thought I mustn't interfere. I was wrong. I ought to have." "But what makes you assume all this, dear?" "Because I can see through your feathers, my poor little bird." Her hand lay on the table, and Jude put his upon it. Sue drew hers away. "That's absurd, Sue," cried he, "after what we've been talking about. I am more strict and formal than you, if it comes to that, and that you should object to such an innocent action shows that you are ridiculously inconsistent." "Perhaps it was too prudish," she said repentantly. "Only I have fancied it was a sort of trick of ours, too frequent perhaps. There, you may hold it as much as you like. Is that good of me?" "Yes, very." "But I must tell him." "Who?" "Richard." "Oh, of course, if you think it necessary. But as it means nothing, it may be bothering him needlessly." "Well, are you sure you mean it only as my cousin?" "Absolutely sure. I have no feelings of love left in me." "That's news. How has it come to be?" "I've seen Arabella." She winced at the hit, then said curiously, "When did you see her?" "When I was at Christminster." "So she's come back, and you never told me. I suppose you will live with her now?" "Of course, just as you live with your husband." She looked at the window pots with the geraniums and cactuses, withered for want of attention, and threw them at the outer distance, till her eyes began to grow moist. "What is it?" said Jude in a softened tone. "Why should you be so glad to go back to her if what you used to say to me is still true? I mean, if it were true then. Of course it is not now. How could your heart go back to Arabella so soon?" "A special providence, I suppose, helped it on its way." "Ah, it isn't true," she said with gentle resentment. "You are teasing me, that's all, because you think I am not happy." "I don't know. I don't wish to know." "If I were unhappy, it would be my fault, my wickedness, not that I should have a right to dislike him. He is considerate to me in everything, and he is very interesting, from the amount of general knowledge he has acquired by reading everything that comes in his way. Do you think, Jude, that a man ought to marry a woman his own age, or one younger than himself, 18 years, as I am, than he? It depends upon what they feel for each other. He gave her no opportunity of self-satisfaction, and she had to go on, unaided, which she did in a vanquished tone, verging on tears. I think I must be equally honest with you as you have been with me. Perhaps you have seen what it is I want to say. That though I like Mr. Phillotson as a friend, I don't like him. It is a torture to me to live with him as a husband. There, now I have let it out. I couldn't help it, although I have been pretending I am happy. Now you'll have a contempt for me forever, I suppose." She bent down her face upon her hands as they lay upon the cloth, and silently sobbed in little jerks that made the fragile 3-legged table quiver. "I have only been married a month or 2, she went on, still remaining bent upon the table and sobbing into her hands, "and it is said that what a woman shrinks from in the early days of her marriage, she shakes down to with comfortable indifference in half a dozen years. But that is much like saying that the amputation of a limb is no affliction, since a person gets comfortably accustomed to the use of a wooden leg or arm in the course of time." Jude could hardly speak, but he said, "I thought there was something wrong, Sue. Oh, I thought there was. But it is not as you think. There is nothing wrong except my own wickedness, I suppose you'd call it, a repugnance on my part, for a reason I cannot disclose, and what would not be admitted as one by the world in general. What tortures me so much is the necessity of being responsive to this man whenever he wishes, good as he is morally. The dreadful contract to feel in a particular way in a matter whose essence is its voluntariness. I wish he would beat me, or be faithless to me, or do some open thing that I could talk about as a justification for feeling as I do. But he does nothing, except that he has grown a little cold since he has found out how I feel. That's why he didn't come to the funeral. Oh, I am very miserable. I don't know what to do. Don't come near me, Jude, because you mustn't. Don't. But he had jumped up and put his face against hers, or rather against her ear, her face being inaccessible. "I told you not to, Jude." "I know you did. I only wished to console you. It all arose through my being married before we met, didn't it? You would have been my wife, Sue, wouldn't you, if it hadn't been for that?" Instead of replying, she rose quickly, and saying she was going to walk to her aunt's grave in the churchyard to recover herself, went out of the house. Jude did not follow her. 20 minutes later he saw her cross the village green towards Mrs. Edlin's, and soon she sent a little girl to fetch her bag and tell him she was too tired to see him again that night. In the lonely room of his aunt's house, Jude sat watching the cottage of the widow Edlin as it disappeared behind the night shade. He knew that Sue was sitting within its walls equally lonely and disheartened, and again questioned his devotional motto that all was for the best. He retired to rest early, but his sleep was fitful from the sense that Sue was so near at hand. At some time near 2 o'clock, when he was beginning to sleep more soundly, he was aroused by a shrill squeak that had been familiar enough to him when he lived regularly at Mary Green. It was the cry of a rabbit caught in a gin. As was the little creature's habit, it did not soon repeat its cry, and probably would not do so more than once or twice, but would remain, bearing its torture till the morrow, when the trapper would come and knock it on the head. He who in his childhood had saved the lives of the earthworms now began to picture the agonies of the rabbit from its lacerated leg. If it were a bad catch, by the hind leg, the animal would tug during the ensuing 6 hours till the iron teeth of the trap had stripped the leg bone of its flesh, when, Should a weak springed instrument enable it to escape, it would die in the fields from the mortification of the limb. If it were a good catch, namely by the foreleg, the bone would be broken and the limb nearly torn in two in attempts at the impossible escape. Almost half an hour passed, and the rabbit repeated its cry. Jude could rest no longer till he had put it out of its pain, so dressing himself quickly he descended, and by the light of the moon went across the green in the direction of the sound. He reached the hedge bordering the widow's garden, when he stood still. The faint click of the trap, as dragged about by the writhing animal, guided him now, and reaching the spot, he struck the rabbit on the back of the neck with the side of his palm, and it stretched itself out dead. He was turning away when he saw a woman looking out of the open casement at a window on the ground floor of the adjacent cottage. "Jude," said a voice timidly, Sue's voice. "It is you, is it not?" "Yes, dear." "I haven't been able to sleep at all, and then I heard the rabbit, and I couldn't help thinking of what it suffered till I felt I must come down and kill it. But I am so glad you got there first. They ought not to be allowed to set these steel traps, ought they?" Jude had reached the window, which was quite a low one, so that she was visible down to her waist. She let go the casement stay and put her hand upon his, her moonlit face regarding him wistfully. "Did it keep you awake?" he said. "No, I was awake." "How was that?" "Oh, you know now. I know you, with your religious doctrines, think that a married woman in trouble of a kind like mine commits a mortal sin in making a man the confidant of it, as I did you. I wish I hadn't now." "Don't wish it, dear," he said. "That may have been my view, but my doctrines and I begin to part company." I knew it, and that's why I vowed I wouldn't disturb your belief. But I am so glad to see you, and oh, I didn't mean to see you again now the last tie between us, Aunt Drusilla, is dead." Jude seized her hand and kissed it. "There is a stronger one left," he said. "I'll never care about my doctrines or my religion any more. Let them go. Let me help you, even if I do love you, and even if you—" "Don't say it. I know what you mean, but I can't admit so much as that. There. Guess what you like, but don't press me to answer questions." "I wish you were happy, whatever I may be." "I can't be. So few could enter into my feeling. They would say it was my fanciful fastidiousness or something of that sort, and condemn me. It is none of the natural tragedies of love that's love's usual tragedy in civilized life, but a tragedy artificially manufactured for people who in a natural state would find relief in parting. It would have been wrong, perhaps, for me to tell my distress to you, if I had been able to tell it to anybody else. But I have nobody, and I must tell somebody. Jude, before I married him, I had never thought out fully what marriage meant, even though I knew. It was idiotic of me, there is no excuse. I was old enough, and I thought I was very experienced. So I rushed on when I had got into that training school scrape, with all the cocksureness of the fool that I was. I am certain one ought to be allowed to undo what one had done so ignorantly. I dare say it happens to lots of women, only they submit and I kick. When people of a later age look back upon the barbarous customs and superstitions of the times that we have the unhappiness to live in, what will they say? You are very bitter, darling Sue. How I wish. You must go in now." In a moment of impulse she bent over the sill and laid her face upon his hair, weeping, and then imprinting a scarcely perceptible little kiss upon the top of his head, withdrawing quickly so that he could not put his arms round her, as otherwise he unquestionably would have done. She shut the casement, and he returned to his cottage. 3. Sue's distressful confession recurred to Jude's mind all the night as being a sorrow indeed. The morning after, when it was time for her to go, the neighbours saw her companion and herself disappearing on foot down the hill patch which led to the lonely road to Alfredston. An hour passed before he returned along the same route, and in his face there was a look of exultation not unmixed with recklessness. An incident had occurred. They had stood parting in the silent highway, and their tense and passionate moods had led to bewildered inquiries of each other on how far their intimacy ought to go, till they had almost quarrelled, and she said tearfully that it was hardly proper of him as a parson in embryo to think of such a thing as kissing her even in farewell, as he now wished to do. Then she had conceded that the fact of the kiss would be nothing. All would depend upon the spirit of it. If given in the spirit of a cousin and a friend, she saw no objection. If in the spirit of a lover, she could not permit it. "Will you swear that it will not be in that spirit?" she had said. No, he would not. And then they had turned from each other in estrangement, and gone their several ways, till at a distance of 20 or 30 yards both had looked round simultaneously. That look behind was fatal to the reserve hitherto more or less maintained. They had quickly run back, and met, and embracing most unpremeditatedly, kissed close and long. When they parted for good, it was with flushed cheeks on her side and a beating heart on his. The kiss was a turning point in Jude's career. Back again in the cottage, and left to reflection, he saw one thing, that though his kiss of that aerial being had seemed the purest moment of his faultful life, as long as he nourished this unlicensed tenderness, it was glaringly inconsistent for him to pursue the idea of becoming the soldier and servant of a religion in which sexual love was regarded at its best a frailty, and at its worst damnation. What Sue had said in warmth was really the cold truth. When to defend his affection tooth and nail, to persist with headlong force in impassioned attentions to her, was all he thought of, he was condemned ipso facto as a professor of the accepted school of morals. He was as unfit, obviously, by nature, as he had been by social position, to fill the part of a propounder of accredited dogma. Strange that his first aspiration towards academical proficiency had been checked by a woman, and that his second aspiration towards apostleship had also been checked by a woman. "Is it," he said, "that the women are to blame, or is it the artificial system of things, under which the normal sex impulses are turned into devilish domestic gins and springs to noose and hold back those who want to progress?" It had been his standing desire to become a prophet, however humble, to his struggling fellow creatures, without any thought of personal gain. Yet with a wife living away from him, with another husband, and himself in love erratically, the loved one's revolt against her state being possibly on his account, he had sunk to be barely respectable according to regulation views. It was not for him to consider further. He had only to confront the obvious, which was that he had made himself quite an impostor as a law-abiding religious teacher. At dusk that evening he went into the garden and dug a shallow hole, to which he brought out all the theological and ethical works that he possessed and had stored here. He knew that, in this country of true believers, most of them were not saleable at a much higher price than waste paper value, and preferred to get rid of them in his own way, even if he should sacrifice a little money to the sentiment of thus destroying them. Lighting some loose pamphlets to begin with, he cut the volumes into pieces as well as he could, and with a three-pronged fork shook them over the flames. They kindled and lighted up the back of the house, the pigsty, and his own face, till they were more or less consumed. Though he was almost a stranger here now, passing cottagers talked to him over the garden hedge. Burning up your old aunt's rubbish, I suppose. Aye, a lot gets heaped up in nooks and corners when you've lived 80 years in one house. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning before the leaves, covers, and binding of Jeremy Taylor, Butler, Doddridge, Paley, Pusey, Newman, and the rest had gone to ashes. But the night was quiet, and as he turned and turned the paper shreds with the fork, the sense of being no longer a hypocrite to himself afforded his mind a relief which gave him calm. He might go on believing as before, but he professed nothing, and no longer owned and exhibited engines of faith which, as their proprietor, he might naturally be supposed to exercise on himself first of all. In his passion for Sue he could not stand as an ordinary sinner, and not as a whited sepulchre. Meanwhile, Sue, after parting from him earlier in the day, had gone along to the station with tears in her eyes for having run back and let him kiss her. Jude ought not to have pretended that he was not a lover, and made her give way to an impulse to act unconventionally, if not wrongly. She was inclined to call it the latter, for Sue's logic was extraordinarily compounded, and seemed to maintain that before a thing was done it might be right to do, but that being done it became wrong, or in other words, that things which were right in theory were wrong in practice. "I have been too weak, I think," she jerked out, as she pranced on, shaking down teardrops now and then. "It was burning, like a lover's, oh, it was! And I won't write to him any more, at least for a long time, to impress him with my dignity. And I hope it will hurt him very much, expecting a letter tomorrow morning, and the next, and no letter coming. He'll suffer then with suspense, won't he? That's all, and I am very glad of it." Tears of pity for Jude's approaching sufferings at her hands mingled with those which had surged up in pity for herself.